Hello everybody, this is Legends of Amberland, and this one was quite a treat to do because it was an unexpectedly old school but still pretty modern feeling, really interesting and fun RPG. So the main conceit of the game is that it's very much sort of like an homage to old school first person RPGs and dungeon crawlers, stuff like the turn-based, tile-based stuff like the Might and Magic games. Not Heroes of Might and Magic, just Might and Magic. Like the game actually on its Steam page describes Might and Magic 3 to 5 as big influences. Although, honestly, to me, one of the things that this reminds me of the most would be the old Gold Box D&D games. And in fact, some of the mechanics are very similar, will be very familiar to you if you've actually played any of those, or even just early Dungeons & Dragons, if you've played, like, 2nd edition or, like, any AD&D stuff. Stuff like, for instance, experience being more of a currency than, like, a bar that fills up, rather than levels being automatic as you gain experience and then eventually fill up the experience gauge. It's more like a currency that you build up, and then you have to go to town, find a trainer, pay them, and then as long as your character in question has enough experience to get to the next level, then you can spend gold to train them up. So it's very much like one of the older Gold Box games, and also like the Might and Magic games, but with some modern sensibilities, like things like a really useful auto map and some fast traveling and stuff like that. So overall, I would say the game is an old school RPG without being uncompromisingly old school. It doesn't take the old school necessarily warts at all. It takes some of the well-remembered parts of those older first-person tile-based, turn-based RPGs and modernizes them a little bit without them losing their personality or what actually made them, old school, legendarily fun in the first place. If you've ever played something like Legends of Grimrock, being another more modern interpretation of the style, then you have a good idea of how this works, although Legends of Grimrock is mostly akin to stuff like Dungeon Master and Eye of the Beholder, whereas this is, I guess if you're going for that sort of comparison, it's more like Eye of the Beholder 2 because of its larger, more open nature. It is a pretty large open-world RPG where you have a party of 7 people, which is kind of interesting. A lot of games like this do parties of 4 or 5. 7 is kind of a large number, but it works pretty well because you can actually create all 7 if you want to by hand from scratch at the character creation, or just have some of them filled out for you, or just quick start and have the entire party made for you. And there are a lot of options. There are different races and also different sub-races within those races, and many different classes, a couple of which will always be exclusive to each race that you can choose. So you can create a pretty varied party. You have your traditional stuff like, wizards, mages, very like DPS-y casters, very tanky characters, healers, stuff like that, but you also have some other kind of interesting stuff that reminds me of, again, like AD&D rules, like the Ranger, which is a lot like the Elf class, because back then in the early days of Dungeons & Dragons, Elf was actually a class and not a race. It reminds me very much of that. And you also have that kind of 2nd edition era rule set, actually that kind of continues into the newer editions as well, where different races require different amounts of experience to level up, so you'll kind of want to balance your party to be just well-rounded and capable of a lot of things, so you don't have any particularly glaring weaknesses that aren't shored up by other members of the party, basically. And 7 is a good number for that. I mean, that's a lot of party members. And one thing I was worried about going into this was that with 7 party members, it was going to be kind of a nightmare managing them all, like all of their levels, all of their equipment, that sort of thing, that it was going to be, very menu heavy, a lot of just tiny, like, micromanagement of equipment and stuff, but that's really not the case. The game manages to actually allow you to, manage your party members pretty easily, while also not oversimplifying the management. You still have a full suite of equipment, accessory slots, weapons, damage percentages, various immunities and buffs, and all kinds of stuff like that. It's just that it's done in such a way that is, it doesn't require you to screw around in menus for like half an hour every time you want to change someone's equipment, basically. It's streamlined without simplifying it, if that makes sense. Like, every character still has a lot of equipment spots and stuff to actually manage, so it's not like it's been overly simplified. It's just that it's presented in a very convenient menu system in a way that you can just very quickly switch between these characters and mess around with their equipment and spells and all that on a very nice menu-driven interface. That is one thing that is not necessarily the best about some of those old school games. Their interfaces often made this more arbitrarily difficult than it needed to be, that's kind of just a thing in general about older games. Older interface design was not always the best for user experience, but in this case, I think that's the main way that it manages to take the old school feel while translating it well into current sensibilities, is to actually have the old school mechanics with new school menu design, so it actually is convenient and not obtuse to navigate, which is helpful. You do have a turn-based combat system as well. Whenever you encounter an enemy on the field, you will stop in place and have to face that enemy, although time continues on, so other enemies that were near that enemy, but not necessarily on the same tile, can actually join the combat as turns go on. So you do need to be careful about how you you physically interact with the world. It's not like a JRPG where you sort of go to like a temporary battle dimension whenever you encounter an enemy, or everything sort of pauses and is separate from the main game. All battles do take place on the actual field that you encountered the enemies on, so other groups around them can join in if you're not careful. And since everything is turn-based, you can very much take your time in terms of trying to find your way through an area, or like planning a route around certain tough encounters and stuff like that, or in actual battles themselves. The game does use a sort of invisible initiative stat that determines the turn order. The turn order is not actually displayed to you. Sorry, sore throat a little bit. And although the turn order of your party members is in a set order. So the very middle of that 7, I think this is one of the reasons why they use 7, is to give you like the sort of physical order. The very middle is technically the front line. So that's where you want your tanky members to be. And then the order goes from the middle left, middle right, second middle left, second middle right, far left, far right. That's just how the order goes. So, and the targeting is also similar, so enemies will target the middle 3 slots more often than they will the outer slots, as long as they're alive. So, even though a lot of games like this use a sort of tile-based system where like all 4 or 5 of your party members technically occupy the same space, you just can't see them. In this case, it actually does use a sort of initiative and spacing system so that you can actually have a difference between tanks and mages and stuff, and where they're actually standing and how likely they are to take damage, because there is an actual target order, basically, which is it's kind of neat. Usually in games like this, you only have like a front line and a back line. It's kind of simple like that. But this case, I think because they went with 7 people rather than like 4, it's a little bit more difficult to just do a front and back. So instead they did this like initiative order thing, which is kind of neat, actually, because it works well. It's intuitive. Like, you know, once the game tells you pretty much as soon as you start how the order works, it makes perfect sense from then on, and you can just drag people around into the slots that you want them to be in real time, so you don't have to worry about like them getting stuck in the wrong place or getting shuffled around or anything. Your party is very much set by yourself. You control pretty much everything about your party. I did mention that there are, of course, levels, and it does use the sort of Dungeons & Dragons leveling system, by which I mean levels are extremely important. So if you're like level 2 and you're facing off against something that's like level 12, you're probably screwed. Although, given the fact that you have 7 people, that does help a little bit, because death by 1,000 cuts is a thing. But levels are very important. They determine your HP and your MP, if you're a class that has MP, and also your general damage, as well as different classes learning different skills and spells at various levels. And some races also get extra stats at certain levels. You know, there is a sub-race of the humans, for instance, that gets like a point of toughness every 8 levels and a point of strength every 12, for instance. So like everyone will have something like that. And also every certain number of levels you will get a free stat point to distribute how you see fit. So yeah, levels are very important in this game. It's very important that you go back to a trainer pretty often and spend your experience so that you can get stronger, because the world around you will not wait. There are lots of very tough encounters and lots of little dungeons and areas that you can come across, because the world is so open that the game doesn't have like a specific order in which you do things. It does have an order. It's not just like a chaotic mess, but the world is so open that you can explore pretty much anywhere from the beginning. Especially once you start getting ships that allow you to go to other continents and islands and stuff like that. So you can encounter all sorts of dungeons and caves and towns and stuff that you may not have, like, you know, it isn't planned that you would encounter at a specific level. So you may enter like a dungeon that has like level 30 enemies and your entire party is like level 12. So you're totally not supposed to be there yet, but you can if you want to. And that's kind of how the game works in general. The game is very much based around your own will. You know, you can explore wherever you want, do the quests in whatever order you want. Even the main quest line itself has a bit of an order to it that you can follow in different ways. So it's not actually a linear main quest. There are various different, like, it kind of splits into different objectives as you go through the main quest line, and you can accomplish these objectives in different ways and in different orders. So you can do all the quests in the game, but you don't have to always do them in the same order every time, which is really nice, because, you know, as open as the game is, you would hope that maybe the main quest line would reward a lot of exploration and stuff like that, and it definitely does. There's a lot of exploration to be had here, and the game very much rewards exploration by giving you more experience, all sorts of really cool loot to equip your characters with, probably dying to a beholder a couple times, and also some interesting side quests and things that you can just find here and there. So exploration is very important in this game, and I always love it when like hardcore exploration is rewarded a lot. In fact, another part of that rewards exploration is the fact that you can find quest items before the quest that you will actually need them for is something that you've picked up yet, which I always like, because I hate it when games make me backtrack by like, I have sort of encountered a dungeon that maybe I wasn't supposed to go to yet, but I was still strong enough to beat it, and then I go to a town later and there's a quest to go back to that dungeon and get something that didn't spawn there until I took the quest, so the game sort of punished me for for just being good enough to do that early, basically. As open as this game is, it's kind of necessary that it allows you to do this, but it's nice in any case that it does. So you will be able to find quest items and other rewards before you find the quest that they're for. So the downside, I suppose, to that is that occasionally your inventory will have just a bunch of random crap in it that you don't know what it does yet, but it also means that you don't have to keep backtracking to areas that you've been before, and it does actually reward you for finding these dungeons and side quests and stuff early, because you can just get the items already, so that by the time you find the quest, you'll be like, oh, I already have that stuff. I can just turn it in right now, and it's nice to be rewarded like that instead of having to backtrack anyway and go do it again as if you like the first attempt didn't matter because you did it before the game wanted you to. So it's nice to have that. As far as like, you know, class variety and character building and stuff, it's pretty varied. There are lots of different classes, like I mentioned, some of which are actually exclusive to different races. I think every race seems to have 2 classes that are specific to them. And there are your other more traditional classes like your warriors and your wizards, but also more specific stuff like sages and rangers and stuff like that. So you can make a pretty varied party, and each class will have different skills and spells that it will learn over time. They all have a different special ability. They all have a stat called knowledge, and each class has like a different definition of what knowledge does for them. Like your more roguey, thiefy classes have knowledge add to your dexterity for evasion rolls. So the higher knowledge you have, you get a bonus to evasion. Whereas your more magey classes have knowledge add to your arcane stat, which is the overall power of your spells. So that's nice because that means that stats aren't really useless depending on the class. Like it actually just has a different role depending on the class, which is a nice bit of concession to that idea. And the spell system is pretty cool because spells have 5 levels, and as the arcane stat of that particular character goes up, you can cast higher levels of the spell. It may just do something simple like decrease the cost for the same effect, like a spell that cures poison. There's pretty much nothing else that it could do because it already cures poison, but it'll just cost a lot less and become more efficient as you level it up. Whereas certain spells that just do pure damage will do more and more damage, maybe have like an all effect that hits all targets and stuff like that. So your spells do evolve so that you don't really obsolete your spells by getting new ones. They get better along with you, which is cool. The weapon and armor system is pretty, it's simple but not basic. Like it makes sense, it's intuitive. You have weapon slots, shield slots, armor slots for body armor and helmets. You have 3 accessory slots, although not all classes can use all 3. It depends on what like their race and class is. And there's quite a bit in terms of variety, so you can even find like unique and legendary gear that has all sorts of special effects on it. You can just find basic stuff like, you know, a whirling sword. It has like a 140% damage bonus, so it's really good for like a high strength character, but it has like this whirling effect that gives you a slight chance to cleave all enemies instead of only hitting one. So yeah, there's a good amount of variety in the gear as well, which is, I mean, to be fair, it's important. It needs like D&D or this general like heavy RPG like this. You want good loot because that's going to be a large selection of what makes your characters more powerful, so you want it to be at least exciting and interesting instead of just like, it's a sword, it's a better sword. Like they do have some interesting effects to them and stuff, which is nice. So overall, I'm a big fan of Legends of Amberland. I think the open nature of its quests and its world is really refreshing. I love how it just lets you, just sort of drops you in the world and lets you go crazy, but there's still enough structure to keep you going when you want to in a very a sort of loose main quest that allows you to explore around at your own pace. And it's just a really cool homage to old school RPGs without being so obtuse, but it does streamline things without losing what made those old school RPGs unique and interesting. So that is Legends of Amberland, everybody. You can look in the description below this video, as always, for the link to the Steam page. I highly recommend checking it out if you're a fan of like Might and Magic or Gold Box RPGs and stuff like that, because it definitely scratches that itch, which is not an itch that's scratched all that often, so it's nice to see. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.